welcome everybody. My name is Zoltán, Kész, and I'm your host today on the Central European Affairs podcast. And my guest today is Alex Faludy, who is a British-Hungarian freelance journalist now residing in Budapest, working from Budapest. Alex, just before we started the recording, you told me that you're working on a very important piece on the 60th anniversary of the Eichmann trial. Can you elaborate on that in a few sentences?
Yes. Well, next month is the 60th anniversary of the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem. And in Britain and the United States, most people know about Eichmann, and they know Hannah Arendt's very famous quote about Eichmann and the banality of evil, and the extraordinary story of his kidnap from Buenos Aires. They don't tend to know much about the relationship with what happened in Central Europe. And in particular in Hungary. So my piece is trying to connect Eichmann with the Hungarian context and introduce that to British audiences.
I see. Now, well, actually, the reason I wanted to have this podcast with you is another German connection in a way, because you wrote a very interesting article in the Church Times the other day, and it was titled "Merkel's Successor Will Shape the Future of the European Union." Why are you saying that?
Well, because Germany is, of course, Europe's most populous and prosperous country. It is the union alliance parties are the backbone of the European People's Party, the largest group in the European Parliament, and so it really provides the centre of gravity for the European Union. Of course, that's not an uncontested dominance, and the German Chancellor cannot direct the European Union on his or her own, but yet it's quite difficult to get things done in Europe without the cooperation of the German government, and so that's why I took that approach in the article.
What are the differences or similarities between the two aspirant chancellors, in your opinion?
Well, Armin Laschet, the Minister-President of North Rhine-Westphalia, represents significant continuity with the Merkel era, and comes from the CDU, from the larger partner in the Union alliance. Markus Söder, the Premier of Bavaria, is like Laschet a moderate conservative, but he presents a number of interesting features, including that he has previously been willing to challenge some of the interests of the German car industry, in particular in the legal disputes with Volkswagen over the emissions fraud a few years ago. So that could present an interesting step change in certain areas of German politics and make coalition building with the Greens in the Bundestag coalition talks this autumn somewhat easier. The other curious thing, of course, is that he's from the Christian Social Union, the Bavarian regional party, and there has not been yet a successful chancellor candidate emerging from the sister party, but he enjoys much greater personal popularity than Armin Laschet. He's polling ahead by as much as 30 points amongst the general public. So it could be an unusual case of the junior partner in the Christian Alliance, Christian Democrat, Christian Social Union Alliance taking the lead, and that's interesting to watch.
Well, also you mentioned that there is the leader of the CSU. CSU has been a very great ally of the Hungarian Prime Minister. However, now the Hungarian Prime Minister and his party has left the European People's Party, of which CSU and CDU are part of. How do you see these developments in the light of the new chancellor, for example?
Complicated and ambiguous. So Laschet has not wished to be drawn on the significance of Fidesz's departure from the EPP. Söder seemed to try and capitalize on it by once Fidesz withdrew from the EPP group in the parliament, calling for its expulsion from the party structures before last week's notice of withdrawal by Fidesz. That sort of signals something a bit different. It's sort of the optics of that are CSU turning its back on Fidesz. I'm a little bit cautious about reading too much into it, regarding it as too much of a change, because Schroeder made his remarks once there was really no potential political cost in making them. It was obvious that Fidesz was going. And of course, Fidesz has left behind KDNP and RMDS within the European People's Party. So while while some people are talking about this as a divorce, there's a bit of me that wonders, to use a slightly naughty term, whether they will manage to remain friends with benefits. Whether there will still be a certain amount of cooperation behind the scenes, even if there are fewer photo opportunities between CSU politicians and Fidesz politicians.
Yeah, where do you see the future of Fidesz in the European Parliament? Because definitely they don't have a party group that they belong to at the moment, and they are getting in bed with Salvini, Kaczynski, and the like. So do you see it as a new trend?
Yeah, and this is complex too. Of course, and it seems that rather than simply join an existing group or an existing party family, Orban wants to create a new alignment, a new formation in which Fidesz could be influential, which would bring together the existing parties of ECR with Salvini from Identity and Democracy. That's quite ambitious, or as we would say in sort of coded mockery in Britain, a bold, a courageous effort, with saying that with a certain amount of irony, because the attitude towards Russia evinced by Salvini is very different from that manifested by Law and Justice, which is very Russophobe. So I'm not sure how plausible this is. The other problem, and the other thing that sort of surprises me slightly about it as an idea is that Fidesz would end up playing second fiddle potentially to Law and Justice. It would be the smaller party in such an alignment, and that could lead to friction, because I don't think that Orban wants to be subservient to someone else's interests. On the other hand, while Fidesz would have a smaller number of MEPs than Law and Justice in this new group, the resources that Fidesz is making available to finance the operations of a new formation are considerable, as a recent report from Radio Free Europe shows. They've been pouring millions and millions into new office space and activist activities and lobbying activities in Brussels. So it's possible that financial leverage and willingness to invest might offset the smaller number of MEPs. That could be a bargaining strategy.
Will the Fidesz MEPs be missed from the EPP? Because there is now, let's say, a vacuum of lots of MEPs, and EPP might be looking for new allies in Hungary. What's your opinion?
Yeah, now that's where things potentially get a bit exciting. So Dan Kellerman, the expert on EU law and politics,
he was my guest last week.
Oh, really? Oh, good. Well, I feel like I'm in a distinguished succession in that case. But he's speculated on this that Fidesz, that EPP will be wanting a new partner in Hungary. in the coming years. And I think that is potentially quite quite promising. And it does highlight the fact that Hungary is lacking in its political mix a real conservative party, a real moderate Christian Democrat party.
Do you see such a party in Hungary now?
No, I don't. I know Jobbik has been desperately trying to sell itself as one, and of course has adopted the strapline, the subtitle, the Hungarian People's Party, with a nod to wanting to join the EPP. But I just don't think that they can pull it off because they're haunted by the legacy of the earlier Jobbik extremism, which and throughout most of Europe, the perception of Jobbik is still very much as an extremist party, whatever changes have occurred. And for German conservatives in particular, because of very obvious historical reasons, association with what has looked to be something shading into the fascist right is with a uniformed arm and so on, is just not possible. It's too toxic. And of course, there are still people involved in the leadership of Jobbik who were part of that era. And that's a huge obstacle to them rebranding themselves in wider European eyes. So I think there is space for a real conservative party to emerge. And I say that and I think that would be important, actually. I say that as someone who, by natural personal inclination, leans just the moderate left. I think moderate conservative parties are important. They're essential to the functioning of healthy political space, and Hungary needs one.
I see. Now, talking about Hungary, the Hungarian elections are coming up next year, and you see that there's a total cooperation between all the opposition parties, including Jobbik, which a lot of people regard at the moment that they have changed and that they are not the same Jobbik as they were 6-7 years ago. How do you see the chances of this cooperating opposition?
Well, certainly much better than in any former Hungarian election. And it's a relief to see that Hungarian opposition politicians have woken up to the fact that it's better for them all to focus on fighting Fidesz than fighting each other, which was one of the depressing things to watch from abroad for many observers hitherto. I think it has a chance. The system is weighted against it, as we all know. But the way that Fidesz has weighted the system so that a small popular majority can yield a large parliamentary majority could be flipped to work against Fidesz. So it is possible. But as we know, there are various ways of manipulating the political space that Fidesz will surely try in the next 12 months. And we can't also completely rule out the possibility of further changes to electoral boundaries. Of course, that's not technically allowable under the Constitution. You're not meant to amend constituency boundaries in the 12 months before the election, but Fidesz has a constitutional majority, so it can do what it wants. So we have to watch that quite carefully, I think.
Can the parties of the opposition govern together if they get elected? Because that's a question that's on the surface all the time nowadays.
I think that's a considerable worry. And on the one hand, there are credible people in the lineup. including, of course, he's not officially a candidate, but Fekete-Győr is a credible candidate. I would also say that Marki Zajpéter is very much a credible candidate and might have advantages over Karacsony in that he could attract disillusioned conservatives and provincial voters. But how you would hold this coalition together and how it could hope to govern effectively is indeed a concern, and I think that some of us will also have been a bit worried by some of the statements seeming to emerge from Fekete-Győr András in the last week or so. My face has been getting a little bit sore from
What do you mean?
Well, the talk of hooking himself up to a lie detector was just sort of gimmicky and embarrassing. But I think the talk of use of the prosecutor's office, for instance, to deal with the corruption networks and so on, and also the talk about potential restriction of the activities of some Fidesz propagandists post an opposition victory. I think those have to be looked at quite. Those sorts of statements have to be looked at quite carefully. And the important thing is not that the opposition should talk about exacting justice in relation to Fidesz. That's the result. That's the job of an independent prosecution service and judiciary to deal with. And the priority for the opposition has to be restoring the independence and functionality and credibility of Hungary's institutions. And also, actually, really in terms of dealing with corruption and corrupt enterprises that have benefited from largesse and clartage in Hungary, the most effective way of dealing with them is to restore a properly free market, because these enterprises and these structures of wealth and patronage that constrict the political space function on the basis of heavy subsidy and corrupt public procurement practices, and take those things away and they will collapse, because they don't have competitive instincts, they don't have innovative talent, and they would not survive in a properly free market.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Well, Alex, thank you very much for being with us today. My guest today was Alex Faludy, a freelance journalist from Britain and Hungary. And I was really honored to talk to you. And this was the Central European Affairs podcast. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks. Take care.